Iowa, I always say it is one of the most transparent and easiest states as far as voting is in the entire nation. And there is no excuse to not vote in Iowa because we have made it so easy. We were one of the early states to offer no-fault absentee voting, for example, way back. This was in Terry Branstad's first or second administration where he signed that one into law. So we have a really good bipartisan history of making it easy for people to vote. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of how to do that and what we're finding in the polls here at AARP and, you know, the state of the election. It's crazy. When Michelle and I were first talking about this presentation, I said, you know, what's going to be interesting is I have a poll that we will have done, and we'll be able to talk about that poll. And now we do have a poll, and that poll is 2 weeks old. In election days, it may as well be 10 years old, I guess. You know, it's just kind of funny how these news cycles are so fast right now. But I was able to gather some recent polling information over the last couple of days, as well as a new poll this morning. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And, you know, I just want to give a little bit of background about myself, just so, you know, you have a sense of my background and hopefully make this conversational. And so I got my start in Iowa politics back in 2002, working for Tom Harkin. So I came to Iowa and I worked in his communications and research department. And then I ended up working on his campaign in 2002. He had a re-election campaign against a member of Congress, Greg Gansky. And so I worked on that campaign. My wife and I then moved back to DC. So I was living in DC. I came to work for Harkin, moved back to DC. And then we were at a Harkin reunion in about March or April of 2003 in DC. And so a lot of people from Iowa came. And I remember looking at my wife during that reunion, and it was at night. And I said, you know, wouldn't it be so much better? Shouldn't we just move to Iowa? Because I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Illinois, and she's from North Carolina. And I was like, you know, the people from Iowa are so awesome. And we had such a great time. And I caught her at a weak moment. She said yes. And literally 2 months later, we moved to Iowa. That's how much I wanted to get out of DC. I just had no desire to live in DC. And so moved to Iowa and worked on a bunch. I worked on the caucuses in 2004, worked on the governor's race in 2006. I became Governor Chet Culver's communications director. In 2008, I worked on the Obama campaign, and in 2012, I was the Obama state director. And in 2014, I ended up running for Secretary of State myself. And I say that's all my Democratic stuff. AARP is nonpartisan. I want to be real clear about that. And I actually, along the way, became really, really close friends with the Mitt Romney state director from 2012. And we actually went into business together and started a polling firm called RABA Research, which stands for Red America, Blue America. And we worked on several other initiatives, local ballot initiatives. I worked on the constitutional amendment, the statewide constitutional amendment in 2010 to create the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. It was the I Will constitutional amendment, which was, again, nonpartisan. So yes, I have a Democratic background, but I have worked very closely with Republicans. And for whatever it's worth, my mom's a diehard Republican, and there's nothing I can do to change that. So I respect both sides. And why don't we just go ahead and get into the presentation here. So Iowa, you know, we have 360,000 members across the state. 2.2 million Iowa registered voters, 13% are AARP members. And so at first I saw that number and I was like, well, you know, that's not a ton. But the thing about AARP members that I think is that people need to understand is AARP members are very engaged, and they have high rates of turning out. And so, and also, I don't think there's any other organization in the country that can say 13% of their registered or their membership makes up the entire demographic of registered voters in Iowa. So while we do represent about a third of Iowans over the age of 50, we do pride ourselves in the sense that our members do turn out. I will say I'm in my second year as state director of AARP, and I got a real taste for this organization last year when I had this crazy idea. I said, why don't we do a series of presidential candidate forums, and why don't we do 3 or 4 candidates a day, all in 1 week, and do them across the entire state of Iowa. And I bet if we propose it to the candidates, we can get every one of them. And then AARP, the national office, said, tell you what, if you can get all the candidates, we'll go ahead and do your crazy idea. And I got all the candidates to agree to do it, because I think the candidates understand the importance of speaking directly to older voters. And so we ended up doing it. We ended up doing about 4 events a day. We started in Des Moines. We went all across the state of Iowa. We did the whole thing in 6 days. We got, unbelievable media coverage. But I think the most important thing we got out of that is before each of the events, all the candidates would then lay out their agenda for older Americans, whether it's long-term care, Social Security, healthcare, et cetera. And every single one of them, by the way, did talk about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. So to the extent that we were able to, I don't want to say force, but we were able to encourage candidates to talk about the issues that voters actually want to talk about, I think was a good thing. So here's the voter registration. Iowa is famously a third. And, when I first came to Iowa, I asked, what was the registration breakdown? They said, it's a third. It goes up, it goes down. But at the end of the day, usually around election time, it lands on a third. And so, but it's crazy because you'll watch it, and that has been true every election cycle. So even if you just have the Democrats doing the caucuses and you have a bunch of Republicans then registering as Democrats to participate in the Democratic caucuses, so the Democrat registration will go way up, Republican will go down, but it is nuts. It always evens out. And right now, this is the registration poll from October 1st. And look at that. I mean, it's, roughly a third again. And so some things, as the Rogaine commercial says, some things are inevitable as the tide. Voter registration being a third is inevitable. So the power of the 50 plus voter is something that I really do want to get into, because it's arguably, I think the biggest untold story of this election cycle. In 2016, with the election of President Trump, 53% of the electorate was 50 plus. In 2018, when Speaker Pelosi, usually in midterms, the percentage of the 50 plus electorate does creep up a little bit. 59% of the electorate was over the age of 50. Typically for the Iowa caucuses, which is, of course, is unique to Iowa, 60% of those who turn out are over the age of 50. And so, again, for those of us that have been involved in campaigns and look at demographics, those are the smart ones. That's why, by the way, that every single candidate running for president agreed really kind of easily to do our forums, is because, well, if 60% of the people who turn out are going to be over the age of 50, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do the AARP forums. But here is our recent poll, and I've never seen anything like this for as long as I've been in politics, and it's not crazy long, but it's been a long time. In 2002, Romney Obama got about 50-50 split on the 65 plus voters. So now we're talking about those over the age of 65. And there's a reason I want to talk about this specific demographic. And they represented about a quarter of the vote share in 2012. In 2016, they represented about 22% of the vote share. Trump, according to exit polls, won the 65 plus voter demographic by 4%. Our recent poll shows Biden leading that demographic by 17%. So our recent poll had Trump up 2, but Biden winning that 65 plus voter demographic by 17 points. The 50 to 64 demographic, Trump was up by 20 points or 22 points. So the reason I highlight this difference is because, first of all, that's a giant gap between 50 to 64 and 65 plus. That's reason number one. I mean, that is an enormous gap. Everyone talks about the gender gap. No one is talking about this gap. And a recent New York Times poll from last week showed a gap of about 20 points between those two demographics. Secondly, I want to point out that the reason the reason our pollster explained for this, and he looked at a bunch of the crosstabs and everything, he said, well, the 50 to 64 demographic are more focused on the economy, 65 plus more focused on health and COVID-19. And my third point on this is Tom Harkin had a pollster whose name was Paul Harstad. And Paul Harstad, when I was a young campaign guy, he told me, all elections are about the economy in one way or another. And he said it point blank, because I was trying to get him to talk about, let's talk about guns, let's talk about other issues that are not in the economy. And he called me and just yelled at me. He's like, I don't want to talk about any of that stuff anymore. All I want to talk about is the economy, because all elections are about the economy. And really, in a lot of ways, that has held true. The question is, this year, we've never seen in recent memory an election being held during a global pandemic. That's why, in my view, and in a lot of people's view, the 65 plus voter demographic is going to decide the election, period. There is no question about it. They're going to return home to President Trump, or they're going to vote for change and vote for Joe Biden. Either way, they are going to decide this election. And I think people are starting to get it. New York Times wrote a story about this recently, but really it is the untold story of this election. Before I go into absentee voting, I do want to say, Michelle, I don't know if you are able, but if you want to unmute, does anyone have any questions about anything so far, or should I just go ahead and keep going?
I think you can go ahead. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, like I said, feel free to raise a hand, type a note in the comments if you do have a question. And Michelle, because I can't see any of that, if you just want to interrupt me and just say, hey, we have a question from so-and-so, I'd be happy to answer that.
Sounds good.
So this is 34 days until the election. So this was Friday. This is data from Friday. During the June primary, we saw a record early voter turnout and record vote by mail turnout. And without question, we are seeing the exact same dynamic play out today. And so, our message to voters is vote safely, whether it is you want to vote by mail or vote early at the county auditor's office or vote in person on election day. Just please, take the time to vote safely. One of the things we saw in the primary was Secretary of State sent out a mailer to all registered voters saying, if you want to request an absentee ballot, feel free to fill this out and do so. And it was overwhelming. I mean, I talked to so many county auditors. The response to that one mailer was just overwhelming. And so we did see, again, record turnout in the June primaries. We saw record turnout with a vast majority of people choosing to vote by mail, which is great. So now we've got a little bit of a different situation going into the general election. As you can see, there is a giant number of requests, and a vast majority, 70% of those requests are over the age of 50, about 4 times as many as at this time in 2016. Now, one of the challenges we're hearing is, that on the Democratic side, there are people there. I think I've got the numbers here. Yeah, I do. Okay. So 82%, we asked, are you concerned about post office reductions going into the election affecting your right to vote? 82% of Democrats, yes, we are concerned. Only 22% of Republicans are concerned. Now we asked another question, are you concerned about voter fraud due to mail-in ballots going into the general election? 38% of Democrats are, 77% of Republicans are. So you got this dynamic playing out where you got the post office reductions on one side, you got the voter fraud on the other. The big question is, how does that affect people who have requested absentee ballots? I can tell you we had a telephone town hall with Secretary of State Paul Pate last week, and some of the questions were, I've requested a ballot, I don't feel comfortable returning it in the mail. What are my options? And he said, you can either take it to your county auditor's office, or if you want to bring it in on election day, you can do that. But he encouraged whatever you do to do it early. And that's the message. At the end of the day, if you have made up your mind, when today the ballots are being mailed out, when you get them this week, cast them, because this is just something that you don't want to wait. You don't want to have linger. And you don't want to leave up to chance. Just cast those ballots. Barb, yeah, you have a question. Oh, you're on mute.
Barb Plakins has a question. She had her hand up.
But you're Barb, so I thought it was your turn.
Oh, the two Barbs. Okay. Yeah. Hey, Barb.
The other Barb. Okay, well, my question, it's a rather ghoulish question, but my fear with voting early, because of the upsurge in political figures falling ill from COVID-19, is what happens if I vote for somebody and they're dead by election day? We've got two old men going at it. And
that is a ghoulish question.
It is, but I think about it, especially because this year, everything happens that you don't think will ever happen.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. And I suppose, given that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, it's possible. I think in answer to that question, I would not let it affect your vote. And so either way, if you were to vote, say, for Trump, he falls ill, something happens, Pence will become the nominee. But my point is, I would not let it affect your vote. If you believe in one candidate or another now, cast the ballot, because I think the odds of the situation that you laid out are fairly slim. Of course, you never know. I mean, like you said, anything can happen, but I guess I wouldn't. I would be more concerned about making sure that vote counted versus that scenario. Okay, let me while we're talking about this and the importance of getting those ballots in, here are the deadlines that you need to know. So voting starts today, and if you want to vote absentee, you need to get that request in by October 24th. And so, but again, if you're thinking about voting absentee, just get the request in today. It's all, the earlier the better. Ballots must be postmarked by November 2nd. I will say again, if you've made up your mind, get them in the mail today. But you could also take your ballot and take it right directly to the county auditor's office if it is November 2nd and you're concerned about it being postmarked. Just take it right to the county auditor's office. Polls are open from 7 to 9 on election day. We have, this is the longest of I believe any state in the country. No one has a 14-hour day anymore, but we still do. And that's a credit to, again, people making it very, very easy to vote. The other thing, and I was in Culver's office when this happened, we have same-day voter registration. This was a bill that he signed into law in 2007. So if you need to register to vote, there are a lot of states that the deadline is today. In Iowa, the deadline is, there is no deadline. So if you want to register on the same day, all you need is a driver's license with your current address on it, and then you can go ahead and register same day. So these are there are a bunch of other deadlines and yada, yada, yada. These are the ones that you need to know about. So, and again, if you have any questions, let me know, but it's pretty straightforward. This is my obligatory, we are nonpartisan, and we do take this seriously. We are nonpartisan, and people, I don't think people realize this. We don't endorse candidates. We don't have a PAC. We don't give money to candidates. We really just focus on the issues. And so, a good thing that we did this year was we said, the Iowa State Fair, the soapbox is no longer happening because the state fair is no longer happening. And so we sponsored with the Des Moines Register what we called our virtual stump speech, which we gave every federal candidate. We went to their house and filmed them and gave them 5 minutes to share their views on the issues to Iowa voters. And every one of them agreed to do it because they know, our membership is really, it is right down the line. It is a third as well. And so they knew that they wanted to talk to our members. And so Republican, Democrat, we work closely with Senator Grassley on prescription drugs. We also work very closely with Congresswoman Axne on prescription drugs. And so that's just one example of us working on both sides of the aisle. Okay. So here is a slide again. News cycles happen fast. This was a slide I thought was relevant on Thursday, which is the presidential debates. I don't know how relevant it is anymore. I know we are going to have a vice presidential debate in Salt Lake City is this Wednesday. So just candidly, I will say both of the debaters in that debate are talented debaters. I think that is going to be a very substantive debate, if I had to guess. And so I would tune in for that one. I think it should be interesting. I know in 2012, when we were when I was working on the Obama campaign, Obama famously did not do well his first debate, and we kind of leaned on Joe Biden to do well on the vice presidential debate, and he did. But Paul Ryan also did well. So this is the debate schedule. I have heard that President Trump I think Biden said earlier this morning that he wanted the debate on the 15th to still happen. So it's possible that it will. We'll have to wait and see. So this slide to me is really, really important because I mentioned to you earlier that I had that pollster that told me that all elections are about the economy. And we asked all these questions. What issues are important to you? And we laid out this battery of issues. And sure enough, what rose to the top is jobs in the economy. But what is second is Social Security. What is third is healthcare. And so, it's one of those things that we view our role at AARP is to remind candidates. I like to say that if 1992 was "It's the economy, stupid," I think this year is it's all about the virus, but don't forget about Social Security. Because I think to the extent that candidates lay out their plan, we're spending a lot of money on COVID. We've got a lot of recovery packages coming out, trillions with a T. The question then becomes, how are you going to pay for all this, but also keep Social Security sound and secure? This is a question that we should be asking all the candidates, and we should have them to commit to protecting Social Security and not doing things like privatizing it. So, and the other thing I want to point out is there are also, you'll see in this battery of issues, you have safe voting and certainly COVID. But at the end of the day, it's an important reminder to politicians that the bread and butter issues are still the issues that are most important. And that's why during these debates and when they're out there talking, they should really, in our view, mention the bread and butter issues to older Iowans. So then we ask this other question: what positions do you want candidates to support? And rarely these days do you get, when asking questions like this, do you get on both sides of the aisle a lot of support for one or two or three issues. These were the top three issues. And again, it goes back to exactly the previous slide. 91% of Iowans that we tested over the age of 50 years old support protecting Medicare from cuts and ensuring seniors get the health care they need. 86% want them to allow to negotiate with drug companies for lower prices. And then 85%, there it is again, support protecting Social Security from cuts. So again, I'm not going to talk about what is not on this list, but for whatever reason, when you turn on the news, everyone's talking about a lot of what is not on this list. And so our goal is to make sure that we talk about the things that voters actually care about. So, so what's at stake? We mentioned this a little bit, but really this is a hugely important slide. And I, frankly, until I saw it laid out like this, this wasn't really clear to me. In 2035, at the rate we're on right now, we will be looking at lower benefits being paid to Social Security recipients. And that is, that's stunning. It's also 15 years away. I mean, 15 years ago, like, I have a kid who's 15, and I remember like yesterday when she was born, I'm like, this is not too far away when we start seeing lower benefits being paid out from Social Security at the current rate we're on. And you combine that with the COVID stimulus and other things. I'm not trying to be alarmist, but at the same time, I think it is frankly time to start addressing this as an issue. And for those that care about Social Security, this is something that we need to talk about. And this is one of the reasons why when President Trump said that he wanted to suspend the payroll tax, which is the tax that pays into Social Security, AARP took a strong stance against that because we're just not going to jeopardize Social Security for anything because it's a lifesaver to so many Iowans who depend on it. So So here you can say, one of the questions, this is just an example. Social Security is self-financed off-budget program. Half of all seniors rely on for more than 50% of their income. So how would you ensure that current Social Security benefits are not cut as part of deficit reduction? If you get a chance, I know it's weird because now we're all virtual and we don't interact with candidates as much as we had wanted. Normally, we would send all of our members out and to town hall meetings and insist that they ask this question. We're not in a position to do that right now, but if you do get a chance to ask any candidate for office, ask about Social Security. Do it because I think, again, it's one of those things that we're not talking about enough. And frankly, when someone wins and goes back, they're going to remember what questions they were asked on the trail. That's how government happens, and that's how they're like, well, before we do that, let's remember. I remember getting asked about this as a candidate. I think we need to be extra careful about yada yada yada. So that's how that all works. Strengthening Medicare, protecting Medicare. I will say this is one of those nonpartisan issues. Both sides agree on the importance of it. And we need to make sure that people are still insistent on Medicare being treated as a serious issue. I know with the prescription drugs, we've been working, as I said, with Senator Grassley on this as an issue. I was amazed last year. We were at the state fair, and in our state fair booth, which is by the warm cookies section at the Varied Industries building, we get this crazy amount of traffic. And again, I'm only 2 years into AARP, but I'm still learning. I'm still learning. And the one thing, probably the thing that we take more seriously than anything over the summer is the state fair booth and making it as dynamic as possible. So one of the things we did was we said, share your prescription drug story. And so we got 200 note cards and we said, all right, we're going to try and collect some prescription drug stories. And we went through those by 5:00 on the first day of the fair. And so we had to then go back to the print shop and print out thousands of these cards. And I have never, as someone who works in politics and loves personal stories, everyone says, go get a personal story about this and this and this. I've never seen anything come in like prescription drug stories. And they were heartbreaking. I mean, I can't tell you how many times the word insulin was used on these cards. And so we ended up sharing them all on our booth, and they were like hanging from a string. And by the end, it was just this cluttered mess, but it was amazing. And we gave every one of those stories to Senator Grassley because he is chairman of the Finance Committee and really on the front lines when it comes to holding prescription drug companies accountable. So anyway, it was inspiring, heartbreaking, but to me, more than anything, it just showed how powerful the prescription drug issue is. So let's see. In long-term care, this is finally. We're going to wrap up here so we can open it up for questions. But I have to talk about long-term care because I have obviously, we have been dealing with this as an issue as AARP. What we have right now is a crisis. We have residents who are not only dying of COVID at a rate that is unacceptable. Over 50% of the deaths in Iowa are tied to nursing homes. But we also have social isolation, which is getting worse and worse by the day. And so we need to have a conversation about long-term care. I say that as AARP, we have been doing surveys and studies on long-term care for over 25 years now. We do an annual survey and we ask people, what do they think of their long-term care? And we take a lot of other data in. And one of the things that is clear every year is people want to live at home for as long as possible. And so right now we have a system in Iowa that relies heavily on nursing homes. And we have a higher percentage of people in nursing homes with quote unquote low care needs than most other states. And what this means is these are folks that could get care at home if they were given the opportunity, yet they're in nursing homes. And that's kind of the way the system is built. And so when it comes to this election and future elections, it's not going to get solved this cycle, but future elections, it is our goal. COVID-19 is a wake-up call for nursing homes. We have to change. We have to change the model. We have to really focus on bringing that care to in-person, people living at home. We have to look at things like ADUs, accessory dweller units. These are the homes that are over, they're over a garage. It's kind of like the house that Fonzie lived in. We have to see if, should we be using more of those types of models when it comes to long-term care for residents. And so, but the point is we have to start making this an issue, and it is our intention to do that. So be on the lookout, because next year, this is something that we're in state planning right now as an organization, but next year, rest assured that we're going to talk a lot more about long-term care and how to make it better for people moving forward. So with that, we talked about drug prices. I already got into that. And then, of course, COVID-19. Yep. So I know I went a little longer than I had intended, but I wanted to squeeze everything in. And I wanted to just really see if you guys had any questions about anything. I'd mentioned I was going to share some recent polling. I'll close with that. A poll today from the same pollsters that took our poll from a couple weeks ago has the Senate race tied now. It is, I think, 48-48. So it is a true battle, which is probably why you have seen more than $150 million, if you can believe it, being spent on the U.S. Senate race. To put that in context, when I ran for Secretary of State, I spent around $1 million, and it was more. I didn't spend it; we raised it, but it was more than anybody had spent ever on this Secretary of State race. You're seeing $150 million spent on this Senate race. I don't even know how you spend that much. I literally don't even know what they're buying. I don't know what cars they're renting. I don't know what blimps they've got, skywriting, but it's bonkers. So now when you watch TV, of course, all you see are drug ads and Senate ads. And then, of course, we've got 3 of the 4 congressional races in Iowa that are contested. So you've seen those ads. And maybe the 4th one, too. You don't know. So in the 4th district, we're Steve King's old district.